And today's second panel discussion, which is called the Roma culture in Ukraine, contributions and challenges. The Roma community has enriched Ukraine's culture for centuries through music, dance and traditions. Yet despite their contributions, they continue to face discrimination and marginalization. Today's discussion will examine the cultural impact of the Roma community, as well as the challenges they confront in Ukraine and beyond. The moderator of this discussion is Arina Stoenescu, and she can present our panelists. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us in this discussion. I have the pleasure to moderate this discussion between Nataliia, Zinevych, and Domino. Unfortunately, our third panelist, Janush Panchenko, had a personal problem, so he cannot join us today, but we will try our best. So I start with presenting Nataliia Zinevych. She's a Ukrainian researcher active at Södertörn University, and she's working with oral history, historiography and Romani studies. Romani studies a part of the Södertörn University research area. And Nataliia documents also Ukrainian scientists at risk and collects stories of Ukrainians in Sweden. But she was also working and leading projects like Radio Roma Chiriklo in Irpin. Yeah. And also documentaries on Irpin defenders. And you also work with the
documentary film.
Yes. And then we have Domino, and Domino is an independent researcher, but he's involved in a lot of Roma studies and Roma activities in Sweden. You've been producing documentaries, being involved in the revitalization of Roma studies, also active at Södertörn University, and also representing Romani language as a minority language here in Sweden. And please feel free to add any of your activities during our speech. So welcome.
Thank you.
So my first question to you is, what drives your interest in this topic regarding Roma? And we can start with Nataliia.
Я поступала навчатися в університет на спеціалізацію, яка тільки з'явилась в Україні на початку 90-х. Вона називалася «Історія і народознавство».
When I started my university studies in the beginning of 1990s, the specialty which I chose was history and народознавство. Social studies.
No, народознавство,
folk studies.
No.
Ethnography. Ethnology.
Ethnology. No. І в цей період з'явився доступ до закритих раніше тем, заборонених, репресованих, дослідники, які ними займалися, в стіл отримали змогу почати говорити про складний етногенез на території України різних народів, різних етнічних груп. І оскільки однією з мотивацій йти навчатися на історичний факультет була потреба розібратись з власною складною ідентичністю, то і зацікавлення спочатку у нас такий був цікавий курс етногеографія. З цього курсу поклала початок тому, що я доторкнулася до теми ромів, і це підраховувала вчора 29 років. Так.
1990s, that was the period when the previously prohibited themes and topics were beginning to be discussed, and some of the people who were studying it in a clandestine, hidden way, they started to publish their research and tell about their research. And the ethnographic research was which I was interested in. Partly I was interested because of my own struggles and attempts to understand my own identity. In that way, I became interested in the question of the Roma identity in Ukraine.
Тему ромів для свого дисертаційного дослідження я досліджувала історію вивчення цієї групи впродовж 200 років науковцями, які мешкали в межах різних держав, імперій від кінця 18 сторіччя до сучасності, і того, які джерела вони для цього використовували.
Yeah, in my own dissertation, I've been studying the 300 years of historical research on the Roma identity across different borders, and I was interested in getting to know the sources which they were using.
Thank you. And you, Domino?
What drives me in this
Topic.
Yeah, well, since I was a child, especially from 8 years old, because I was with my family, my parents and some of my siblings in the city and where we lived at that time. And after a while, my elder brother and I, we mentioned to our parents that we are a little bit hungry, we want to eat something. And okay, we searched for a cafeteria and we went inside and so on. And my brother and I, we started to look for a table to sit down beside. And already then, one from the cafeteria was entering to our parents and said that you have to go out. And I remember our father when he mentioned that, please come, we have to go. And I just answered it, no, we're going to eat something. That's why we are here. But follow us now outside. And our mother mentioned that also. While outside, I remember when I looked at my father, why did we have to go? We were there only to take a snack. He didn't answer any good answer to our kids, us kids, but he mentioned, I remember that, well, it is sometimes like this, but we searched for a new place. And we did, and we succeeded to have this fika, but something happened with me. I remember I was thinking about this situation. It wasn't that bad. There is more bad situations. But for an 8-year-old kid, this was really, really strange. I was thinking about that situation for 3 days. I couldn't drop it. And I constantly asked my elder brother, why did they do that? We didn't did anything wrong. But that made something to me when I get years and years and elder and at the teenage years and so on. As a young adult, I just started to say to myself that this is wrong. What is happening? Something has to be changed. And when there is injustices, discrimination or whatever, and especially to children, I can't just stop and say that, well, somebody else can do something to help it. That's the way. No, I have to do it. Also, if I cannot kräva.
A demand.
I cannot demand from other people if I don't do it by myself. So I think that's the fundament.
Yeah. And it's interesting in this discussion, and also when discussing the Roma culture, Roma rights, that we are working together. And you, Domino, you are a Roma. Both Nataliia and we are not. We are known Roma. But I think that it's something what you are doing in your work. It's dealing with identity. The Roma identity and the history writing. And this is also something that with the Russian invasion in Ukraine is very important. And you, Nataliia, just said that it was your quest for identity and forbidden topics that were not in place. So I would like to ask you, Nataliia, about starting with the challenges of Russian aggression against Ukraine for the identity and culture of Roma groups during this time. And you mentioned that started 2014. So please.
Після 14-го року, так. Дякую. Так, безумовно, це вплинуло, оскільки розселення різних етногруп ромів, воно нерівномірне по різним регіонам України, але так склалося, що вони переважно є мешканцями прикордоння і західного, і східного. На той момент були.
Yeah, it had an influence. The Roma ethnic groups in Ukraine, although they dispersed in all the regions of Ukraine, it just so happened that mostly they are located at the border adjacent regions.
І відповідно, коли відбулася окупація Криму і заход російських військ на території Донецької і Луганської областей, то місцеве ромське населення так само хтось опинився в окупації, хтось обрав для себе виїхати в Росію. Переважна більшість виїхала на територію України.
That's why when Crimea was occupied and when Luhansk and Donetsk were entered by the Russian troops, the Roma people disproportionately, they had to either leave their homes or stay under occupation. Those who left their homes mostly went to Ukraine and stayed there.
І тоді здійснювався громадський проект дослідження, інтерв'ю з цими ромами, які виїхали, обрали для себе різні стратегії. І для мене вони є у відкритому доступі, їх робили українські активісти і антидискримінаційний центр «Меморіал», який на той час був в Санкт-Петербурзі.
At that time, we conducted a social research. We interviewed and studied the people who left their homes, the Roma people. It was partly conducted by the Memorial Center at that time, located in St. Petersburg.
І їхні досвіди, і те, як вони про це говорили, дуже є насправді корисними. Я це, наприклад, використовувала в тренінгах для журналістів, показати, що те, що людина мовить, може бути важливіше, ніж те, що ви прочитали в підручнику.
The way they were describing their experiences seemed very powerful to me, and I understood that the way a person is describing something, saying something, can be more important than what you can read in a textbook.
Коли для ромів Донеччини величезною травмою стало те, що вони втратили свої домівки. І оце міф про кочовий народ, а для людей це, для цих родів було, це перші будинки, які вони збудували на своїй землі.
So the Roma people who had to left Donetsk region, it's important to say that there is a myth about the Roma people, that they are the vagabond people, that they are travelers, but the houses which they had to leave in Donetsk were the first houses they built, and they actually, as I understand, they became enamored with them and they consider them their home, so it was hard for them to leave.
І вони фактично змушені були тікати. І оцей момент не їхати, коли ти хочеш, куди ти хочеш, а тікати, це змінює абсолютно акцент.
And so there is a huge difference for them as a traveling people. There is a distinction between going somewhere because they decide to do so and escaping because they have no other choice.
І також ті, хто виїхали в різні регіони України, для них це був досить складний момент адаптації в інших середовищах, в спілкуванні з іншими групами ромів, з якими вони до того не мали настільки тісних контактів.
Also for those Roma who left Donetsk region, it was hard for them to settle in other regions in Ukraine, partly because before they were not in contact with other Roma groups who lived there before them.
Але цікаво, що молодь, яка виїздила з цього регіону, який опинився під окупацією, ромська молодь, вони не просто обирали для себе, наприклад, іти в українську вищу освіту, але і ставати публічними громадськими діячами. Для мене це теж такий дуже важливий маркер.
And it is noteworthy that the younger Roma who were leaving their houses, they were not just choosing to receive Ukrainian education, but they were willing to become public figures, public activists in Ukraine and to defend their cause in that way.
Okay, thank you. That's very interesting hearing that also, because that leads to the next question to you, Domino, regarding the Roma identity here in Sweden. And if you see any parallels, of course, not with the situation today, but with the historical, from the historical perspective, if there are any similarities regarding the identity and the places where Roma communities are.
Yeah. I would like to start with, because I forgot from the beginning, I would like to say thank you for the invitation to be here today together with you. And I feel for the Ukrainian people, as so many around the world, because of the situation Ukraine and Ukraine's people are under right now. And let us pray and hope for a better situation really, really soon. For your people, your hearts, your soul, and your children. To your question, Arina, yes, if I just take the generation from my parents, they are born in the 40s here in the Nordic countries. My ancestors, they comes from Finland, but I'm grown up here in Sweden by myself and my siblings. My parents, they weren't allowed by the society to go to the public school at that time more than 2 years, the first and second degree, and then they were sort of kicked out because of the Roma background. So it was forbidden here, and more here in Sweden, it was forbidden to take the Roma children into the schools because the principals, but also the communities, the decision makers, they mentioned that you don't have any address, you are not settled down in the housing issues, so you cannot write in your children to the schools. But in the same way, the decision makers, they didn't allow the Roma people to be settled down. And that was until the middle of the 60s. Then in principle, mainly you could write from the middle of 60s to write to put your kids to the school here in Sweden, but in the practice not. because everyone was in the same thinking, you know, and the Roma people didn't knew their rights at that time at all. So it stopped first in the beginning of 70s when it started a little bit better. And that had made a huge consequences, of course, if you only look at the housing, the labor market, the education, but also the health issues for this group. Here in Sweden, they made it the education plikt.
Compulsory in the school.
In the year 1842. And in the first paragraph, you can read for the Swedish boys and girls, no one else.
Yeah.
And if you look from 1842 to the middle of 60s, over 100 years before for the majority. So of course the situation is that there is a lot of academics and you know, different society, you know, and then they are still today, I hear sometimes when I'm lecturing or debating, yeah, but the Roma people, they don't want and they can't because, and that's why we have to give them, do for them. But as what the majority in this country doesn't know, because it's not in the history books, you cannot study anywhere in the education system and different levels. There were so many laws which was forbidding this group to take part of the society here in Sweden in different ways. For the women's, for the children as well. And it's only recently, into 2 decades, when the majority are starting to know a little bit more. Oh, was it like that from the church, from the royal house earlier when they had the power? Oh, and also in the political system which we have today, still today. Now I hear sometimes, we didn't knew. And this is this fantastic country, Sweden, which have still the reputation around the world that it's a friend to the minorities and human rights nation. And that's true, but it's really, really a lot when it comes to some other country, some other place in the world. But in their own backyard, for the national minorities, these 5 historical minorities we have here in Sweden, there is a lot to do. It's a really, really dark history, which are giving symptoms and consequences. For example, the anti-Ziganism, the hate against Roma people. We can still touch it here. And especially in this country, even if it's a rich country and you know, well developing in the fundament when coming to the human rights, the stigma pictures against this group is so deep-rooted in the Swedish soul that if somebody is saying some really nasty things, even to the children, Roma children, nobody cares. Nobody is saying that, why are you doing that? This is against, and you know, the minority law or anti-discrimination law and so on. And nobody is really caring. This is the situation still for the Roma people here in Sweden. So in that way we could compare, but we cannot, of course not, as you mentioned, compare when the war is going on now in Ukraine, because that's more horrible situation, of course. When there is another force who doesn't care who else it is, you know, they just want to take. But in the other way, we could compare a little bit more when it comes to these topics like labor, education, housing, and health issues. And here in Sweden, the Roma people are living from 8 to 10 years less than the majority, for an example. There is this science or scholars about this too. And that says a lot in this rich country.
Yeah, and thank you. That's very interesting also, because I want to ask you, Nataliia. You said something very interesting about the way people were telling their stories, the oral history. And I'm a little bit interested, how is the, I mean, of course, now it's an extreme situation. A lot of things have been time out for the time being until the peace will return. But how is the situation, how are the Roma minority treated by the society and infrastructure? You said that a lot of taboo topics started to be studied in the 90s. So do you, listening from what Domino said, are there any parallels, similar situation, or is it something that pop up in this context?
Так, безумовно, можна говорити про певний рівень ромофобії і певний маргінальний статус меншини, який дістався у спадок, так, незалежній Україні. І ситуація була досить строката, тому що роми в Україні дуже різні. І, відповідно, вони мають різний бекграунд, вони говорять різними діалектами, вони мають різний історичний досвід. По суті, вони, ці групи, дуже часто були жертвами соціальних експериментів.
Ukraine inherited a certain kind of prejudice or anti-Roma attitude. And the Romas, they were considered to be an ethnic minority. But the situation is generally quite complex because there are many different groups of Roma people in Ukraine with different cultures, traditions, and languages and dialects. And because of that, the question is not easy to, it's not easy to generalize.
Ці експерименти проводилися з кінця 18 сторіччя освіченими абсолютизмами.
There were experiments conducted on the Roma people, beginning from 18th century by the rationalist absolutists. I think by the absolutist royal power.
І через це вони набували в певні моменти якихось особливих статусів, або їх концентрували в якихось спеціальних поселеннях, або із них намагалися зробити козаків, наприклад, в Російській імперії.
So in the Russian Empire, they were either marked as having a special status, they were located, settled into a certain territory, and sometimes they were even conscripted and as Cossacks to fight for the government.
А в Австро-Угорській імперії із них намагалися зробити нововенгрів.
In the Austro-Hungarian Empire, they tried to create a new ethnos called the New Hungarians out of Roma people.
А на території румунських князівств, Валахії, Молдови, вони взагалі кілька століть перебували в різного рівня рабському статусі.
And in the Romanian territories like Moldova and Wallachia, Roma people were treated as slaves for many centuries, essentially.
Але разом з тим були умовно більш привілейовані мікрогрупи, які мали особливий в позитивному сенсі статус, особливі дозволи, право торгувати, право на мистецтво.
At the same time, there always were some certain privileged groups of Roma people who had special rights to trade or to make art.
І, відповідно, вони створювали різні досвіди взаємодії з іншим населенням України, і українцями, і неукраїнцями, бо тут важливо розуміти, що були і інші, були євреї, були німці, поляки і так далі.
So correspondingly, they had a different experience of interaction with different ethnic groups, like Germans, Polish people, or the Jews.
Також роми потрапили, як були частиною радянського експерименту по створенню радянської людини.
Also, Romas were used as a part of the Soviet experiment of creating a new Soviet person or people.
І якщо в 20-ті роки була політика коротка коренізації і були створені перші початки ромської літератури, кодифікована мова, з'явилися якісь емансипативні рухи, то в 1938 році ромська мова була визнана неперспективною і потрапила фактично під негласну заборону до 90-х років.
And while in the 20s in the Soviet Union there were attempts of Koreanizacja, of rooting ethnic groups in Soviet Union, connecting them to their ethnic and traditional backgrounds. By the time of the 30s, year 37, the Roma language was officially labeled as not having any historical perspectives, and until 1990 there was no usage of it.
І, на жаль, в 90-ті роки, коли ми говоримо про емансипований ром, це дуже часто дорівнювало русифікований ром.
And in the 1990s, when we were talking about a liberated Roma person, unfortunately, most of the time what we meant is that it was a Russified person.
І в 90-ті роки ця ситуація не могла одномоментно змінитися, хоча ми можемо говорити про те, що оці заборони, вони зникли. Не було прям якоїсь дуже фінансової підтримки від держави, але не було заборон.
So the way in which the situation changed in the 1990s is that although there were no any financial aid for the Roma people, at least there were no longer any official formal prohibitions for their functioning.
І, відповідно, роми почали включатися в загальні процеси, насправді, на рівних. Наприклад, процеси, пов'язані з меморіалізацією Бабиного Яру.
So that's why Roma people started to become engaged in certain public processes on an equal footing with other people in Ukraine. For example, when it concerns the development of the memorial complex for the Holocaust called Babi Yar in Kyiv.
Тому що у ромів-киян в родинній пам'яті зберігалися ці історії, і коли був збудований ще радянський меморіал, вони вже приходили на оці заборонені зустрічі. І тут важливий такий момент, що є певна ілюзія, що роми є гомогенна група, але насправді вони досить тісно пов'язані родинними зв'язками із українцями, із євреями, із кримськими татарами, і відповідно вони були частинкою інших національних рухів і один в одного щось запозичували.
Already in the Soviet Union, Roma who lived in Kyiv, they started to attend the Babi Yar Memorial, and they had many personal stories connected to the Holocaust, because although we think of the Roma people as a distinct separate group, in reality it composed of different groupings. Many of those are connected by family ties, both with Ukrainians and with the Jews.
І в Бабиному Яру меморіал 76-го року робив архітектор, який потім створив, власне, меморіал ромам, ромську кібітку. Це теж для мене символічно.
So the architects, for example, who created the memorial for the Holocaust in 1976, later also created the Romska kibitka, the memorial in
Бабиному Яру.
In the Babi Yar.
І він це пояснював тим, що відчував своє заборонене ромське коріння.
And he explained it by the fact that he struggled with his prohibited Roma identity, his Roma background.
Але історія цієї кібітки насправді складна, і вона десь ілюструє дуже непослідовну політику пам'яті в Україні 90-х, 2000-х років.
But the history of this kibitka is complex because it illustrates the inconsistent policy of memory and recognition in Ukraine in 1990s and in 2000s.
Бо якщо розглядати це в європейському контексті меморіалізації місць розстрілів, місць геноциду ромів, то можна сказати, що Україна була передовою країною на той момент. І крім того, гроші на цей монумент зібрали самі роми. Це не був грант, це не було державне фінансування.
Yet if you cast on it the light of the European context of memorialization of the places of execution of ethnic groups, actually Ukraine was ahead of its time, but the funds, for example, for these memorials were not provided by the government, but were fundraised by the people themselves.
Але коли був створений цей меморіал, цю кібітку не дозволили поставити в Бабиному Яру, і вона стояла біля Кам'янця-Подільського, і звідти її повернули в 2016 році.
Yet, when the kibitka was built, it was not permitted to be situated in the Babi Yar. That's why it remained in Kamianets-Podolsky until 2016, when it was returned back.
Тоді, коли на загальноєвропейському рівні вже було відзначення, вже і просили країни пробачення, і Євросоюз прийняв постанову про увічнення пам'яті, і це насправді значною мірою в рамках євроінтеграційних процесів вплинуло на те, що політика пам'яті щодо геноциду ромів, вона стала прямою, тобто без оцих коливань, коли впливали якісь певні люди на це.
By that time, in many European countries, they were issuing official apologies for the treatment of the Romas, and in Ukraine, it was partly a sign of European integration and complying with the new resolution which was accepted at the European Parliament with regard to the treatment of minorities.
І якщо говорити про зв'язки зі Швецією, певною мірою вплинув інтерес шведських істориків, дослідників до вивчення геноциду ромів в Україні як забутого геноциду, і їхні візити до офіційних установ, до громадських організацій, прояви в медіа, вони вплинули на те, що ромам простіше стало адвокатувати оцю свою ідею.
And if you speak about Sweden, partly that process was connected to the interest of the Swedish researchers who were interested in excavating the question of forgotten genocides, including Roma people in Ukraine. And because of that, there was they shed a light on how the civil organizations and the government institutions are treating this issue. There was a change connected to that.
And then it's easy to go over to you, Domino, because you've been directly involved in introducing the 2nd of August as a Memorial Day for the Roma Holocaust. So can you just tell us a little bit of how you worked? And I want you, Nataliia, meanwhile to think about just telling us the groups, the Roma groups that you have in Ukraine, and then we will get back to language, which will be our last issue. But the Roma memorial in Sweden and the work with that.
Yeah, the Holocaust issue has been a really tough question here in Sweden, as in many parts, as we heard. Nataliia mentioned also in other parts in Europe, and still today is. There is a Holocaust, remember, a task force alliance with over 30 countries. Some of you might have heard about it. But they are in charge of the Holocaust issue here in Sweden, more or less, together with the Authority Forum for Living History here and also the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And they have been deciding a little bit about this still today, 2 years ago, that for the Roma people it shouldn't be called Holocaust, but genocide. And when it was the same war, same administration, you know, and there was this ethnic background issues of the Nazis, racist issues, and still, even though they are like this camp,
struggle.
yeah, this struggle attack are still going on because of the decision makers who are not coming from these minority groups, and they don't have that history either. And so I was thinking about this. I remember 2008 when I was working for the government, and to mark this issue somehow from the Roma perspective. And since 2009, we made the 2nd of August as a commemorial day here in Sweden, and 2015 it became official since that European Parliament Roma resolution, which took part from 15 April 2015. I was working in the Parliament myself then, and I am really happy that I could be one little part of that job. There is, in that resolution, you can see in the end, in number 14, that the Holocaust for the Roma people should be called as the Holocaust. And it was my input, which made my boss in the parliament were the shadow reporter, so I could have. That's why I could had the input there. But still today, it's 16th year. This year we will have the commemorial taking place of 2nd August for the Roma victims of the Holocaust for the 16th time. But still today we are struggling to get out this knowledge to the majority, to include that also to the history books and also to the schools and so on, that this happened also, among other evil things, horrible things. But it's a struggle still today that also the Roma victims and the Roma third and fourth generations of survivors are included also equally. Not more and not less, but equally. They are not demanding, and we are not demanding anything more than just being respected and seeing, and that our voices are also getting heard. But there is, well, the fights goes on, and it has to, because it's a question of fundamental rights.
Yeah, and. We have been discussing here about the history, the right to write the history, and also the importance of acknowledging the facts and being treated equally. I want now, towards the end of our discussion, to ask you a little bit about future plans and how this work with the Roma identity, Roma groups can be carried on. And I want to ask you first, Nataliia, about which groups of Roma do you have in Ukraine, and which languages are they speaking, if any? You said already that there were some experiments of changing the identity during the history. But if there are any initiatives regarding working with the language as an identity part of constructing for the future.
Дякую. Я, мабуть, розділю на дві частини: на те, що є негативне, і те, що є позитивне щодо мови. Так, ситуація складна, бо немає єдиної ромської мови. В Україні досить багато різних груп, у яких різні діалекти, плюс вони русифіковані, плюс частина неписемні, плюс у них немає своїх культурних майданчиків.
So I will separate my answer in two parts. One is negative and the other is positive. So the negative part is that indeed there are many different Roma languages in Ukraine, and some of the Romas are Russified, some of them are illiterate.
Позитивною складовою можна назвати те, що коли в 20-х роках кодифікували в Радянському Союзі ромську мову, то один із дослідників, який цим займався, це українець Олексій Баранніков, і він, незважаючи на те, що було обрано для кодифікації російського вірку ромської мови, в додатку лінгвістичному він виклав результати власних експедицій на території російсько-українського порубіжжя, де жили українські роми.
So in 1920s, the Roman language was codified. Unfortunately, the dialect which was used as a basis for that was the Russian dialect of Roma. But the positive part is that a Ukrainian scholar who was developing this codification, he made a footnote where he described his own ethnographic research expeditions into the border adjacent regions where people spoke Roma languages, where he actually described different varieties of the usage of the language.
І це стало базою того, що українські роми, які прагнули зберегти свою мову, зверталися до цієї частини словника, і у них була база.
It led to the situation that the Roma people who lived in Ukraine, who had interest in restoring and learning about their language, they could consult that footnote and use it as a source and base for developing the language.
І якщо вони не мали змоги в Радянському Союзі публікуватися ромською мовою, вони це могли зробити, виїжджаючи в країни Варшавського договору.
In case if they couldn't publish their works in the Soviet Union, they could do it by leaving Soviet Union and publishing it in the countries of the Warsaw Pact.
В пізньорадянський період.
Late Soviet period we're talking about.
І власне, таким чином вони входили в мережі європейського, ромського і громадського руху, і руху по розвитку ромської мови, і це досить складний процес взагалі в цілому світі.
In that way, they were entering the European networks who were championing the development and social work for the Roma identity.
І в Україні, можна сказати, одна із причин того, що ромська мова не кодифікована, пов'язано з майже тотальним знищенням напряму сходознавства, а ромська мова є східна мова.
And the reason why in Ukraine now you have almost no studies about Roman language is that the discipline or the field where such study could have been conducted is the Oriental studies, since the Roma language is considered a part of that group of that research field. But in Ukraine you don't have those departments anymore, therefore you don't have Roma studies.
Але хочу назвати дуже важливий проєкт 2016-17 років створення платформи «Ромська мова в Україні» за участі ромської молоді.
But I would like to mention one project in Ukraine, 2016-2017, where the Roma youth participated in the creation of the Forum for Roma Language.
Цю платформу створив лінгвіст Михайло Ослон, але були залучені молоді роми, які записали діалекти в своїх родинах, і їх можна було почути, прочитати переклад.
The leader of the research was Mihailo Aslon, but the young Romas were invited to participate in the project by means of recording the different dialects of Roma language used in their families.
І для мене цей проєкт важливий, тому що, на жаль, наука дуже часто була інструментом репресій. І ця травма, вона досі присутня в спілкуванні науковців з ромами.
For me, this project is important because very often science was used as means of essentially experimenting on Roma people, and that's why they are still quite wary about participating in experiments like that. But this one seems to be a positive one.
І тому важливо, що роми самі мають визначитись, наскільки вони готові пускати в свою культуру, в свою мову, тому що дуже часто вони кажуть, що це для них захисне поле, що коли вони говорять своєю мовою, їх не підслухають, їхні слова не перекрутять, хоча коли їм пояснюють, що є нові технології, і це вже не так, але от такі внутрішнє переконання, воно досить сильне досі.
It is this traumatic experience that makes Romas today wary about participating in experiments like that, because they are afraid that what they say can be distorted or misrepresented by the people conducting the research. But today we are trying to tell them that new scientific methods can do justice to their experience. But at the end of the day, this is the question of the self-determination of the Roma people, and the question when they are going to be ready to participate in the work like this.
І насправді те, що це збирали роми у ромів, це дає дуже важливий оцей момент верифікації, бо, на жаль, дуже багато лінгвістичних джерел є сфальсифікованими.
And it is important that it were the Romas who were collecting this information from the Romas, because otherwise many of the linguistic sources which people can consult when studying this topic were unfortunately falsified.
І дуже, от з одного боку, ромська мова на межі зникнення, а з іншого боку, у неї є великий історичний шанс завдяки цифровим технологіям і емансипації молодого покоління ромів.
So on the one hand, the Roma language is on the brink of getting extinct, but on the other way, thanks to the new information technologies, we are maybe at the prefaces of learning new things about the language and developing it.
Шкода, що ми не можемо сьогодні послухати Януша Панченка, бо якраз він є одним із таких яскравих представників і є і ромським дослідником, і літератором, і викладачем, і громадським діячем.
And it's a shame that we cannot hear from Janush Panchenko, one of the panelists today, because he is one of those people, social activists and researchers of language who are dealing with these questions.
І він робить дослідження і разом з цим навчає діалекту, який досліджує, діалект українських ромів, влахів.
And the dialect which he is conducting his research on, he is also a teacher of it, so he can help people learn it.
І тут я би хотіла сказати як репліку, так, дійсно, назовні Швеція в багатьох моментах виглядає як рольова модель.
And I would like to say that in many ways, Sweden may look like a role model.
Наприклад, саме наявність ромського радіо в Швеції мотивувало створити в Україні ромське радіо.
For instance, the presence of the Roma radio in Sweden inspired Ukrainians to create Roma radio in Ukraine.
Наприклад, включеність спадщини Катерини Тайкон дуже стимулювало те, що українську ромську поетесу Романі почали після років невидимості запрошувати на міжетнічні діалогові майданчики.
So the presence of Katerina Taika in the ether inspired, I think, Ukrainians to include many of her works previously hidden and unavailable for the public translation.
З іншого боку, те, що ромська мова зникає і в Швеції, і є запит на фахівців, які знають ромську мову, призвело до того, що Януш Панченко співпрацював з ромським радіо, також молоді роми, і він в тому числі озвучував мультфільми для ромських дітей ромською мовою.
And the possible extinction of the Roma language in Sweden also led to cooperation with Janusz Panchenko and his young colleagues, so that they, for example, participated in the translation of some of the cartoons using Roma language.
І тут цікаво, що самі роми казали, що вони відчувають ромську мову якоюсь мірою міжнародною мовою, бо можуть порозумітися в багатьох країнах.
And they were saying that they feel that Roma language is partly a international language, lingua franca, because by using it they can be understood and understand people from different countries.
Війна в Україні, на жаль, дуже багато позитивних тенденцій просто змела.
Unfortunately, the war in Ukraine had washed away many of the positive tendencies that were in place before.
Але разом з тим вона проявила унікальні, дуже відважні риси ромських активістів, які стали голосом України в Європарламенті і на інших високих майданчиках з перших днів вторгнення.
While at the same time it brought to light some of the voices of the Ukrainian Roma activists who became the champions of the Ukrainian cause in Europe, including in the European Parliament.
Також вони активно включилися в переосмислення імперських впливів на міноритарні групи на території України. І про це озвучують також публічно на міжнародних майданчиках, що це геноцидарна війна проти громадян України.
They also became engaged in the discourse around imperialism in Ukraine and its influence on different minorities when participating in the different European events and in the discourse.
Що коли вони опинялися в ситуації загрози, їхня загроза подвоювалась, бо вони були проукраїнські і вони були роми.
Because when they were under threat, the threat to them was doubled by the fact that they were both pro-Ukrainians and Roma.
І якщо, наприклад, поглянути на інформаційну війну, то ромську тематику намагались в ній використати росіяни багато разів.
If you look at the informational war, you'll see that Russians were trying to use the theme of Romas in their anti-Ukrainian propaganda many times.
Наприклад, робився вкид, що якщо Україна вступить до Євросоюзу, то в Україну відправлять ромів, яких депортують з інших країн. Це було, наприклад, в 2013 році, коли, можливо, пам'ятаєте, Саркозі щодо ромів тоді робив дискримінаційні санкції.
So, for example, in 2013, Russians created a piece of disinformation that in case Ukraine enters European Union, European countries will deport many Romas into Ukraine. And partly it was connected to the issue around the discriminatory words of Sarkozy regarding Romas in France.
Wow, that's really yeah, I kind of I'm speechless here, but we are soon ending with some questions. So please keep your questions. I just want to, and it was thank you that you mentioned Janush Panchenko's work, and as I understood, unfortunately, the Ukraine's first Romani youth center, Roma that he was working in Zaporizhia, that was
Kherson region.
Kherson region that was unfortunately destroyed. But what is most important now is that we are aware of things happening, and also starting and trying to create connections with the Roma community in Ukraine and the Roma community here in Sweden. And I would like to ask you, Domino, to say just a couple of words about the examples and what can be done from the Swedish experience with working with Roma language revitalization.
Well, yes, shortly now, but we have approximately something about 15, 17, 18 different varieties about the Roma languages, varieties here in Sweden. We also, I want to mention that we also have a law that forbid to have statistic of any minorities of ethnic background or some other background. It can be self-living young moms also. You are not legally, you cannot count them either, how many they are if it's come to groups. And in my mind, I think that's good. So we are not serving the extremists or those who want to use those numbers statistically for some kind of issue. We have had 25 years now this year, this spring now, we will come with the national minority politics here for the 5 historical minorities which I mentioned. With the rights of the Framework Convention of Protection of National Minorities and the Language Charter for territorial or minority languages. 25 years, it's a long time, but in the history perspective, it's a very short time. And I think that the language rights for the national minorities are still behind us. It should be in front of us and giving the opportunities, but we are not really there. Even if I am working in the university with the revitalization of Romaniship, which will end in university degree points of different variety language courses soon, and that's really good and historical, because we don't have that in the universities levels here in Sweden yet. Finland has it, but we don't have it here. So we are really struggling, and then it's, of course, as you know, it's a political issue. Who are governing the country for this mandate? Which culture minister and the education minister are giving more money for the minorities and governmental assignments? We had it for 2 years, but we only have since the 1st of January this year. They didn't fortsatt inte.
Prolonged.
They prolonged the revitalization of Romaniship assignment, but the teacher education they did. Mm-hmm. So that's a little bit problematic, and lucky as we are now, anyway, the university head of the university took own decision to, at least this year, prolong the mission assignment with the revitalization assignment also, but it's not the governmental anymore. That says a little bit about the situation where we are in Sweden here with the 25 years of this language rights. But we are doing our best, of course, with those förutsättningar, with those framework we have now, and yeah, I could talk a little bit. I could mention more about this, but I'm seeing the clock ticking. But I've got also one. I want to just mention about when you mentioned Nataliia Janush Panchenko's work and with the Roma platform in Ukraine, but also his language projects and so on. Please, and Julia, the organizers, please mention to Janusz that he's welcome to contact us in Södertörn's University, the Roma, not the critical Roma studies, because that's another unit, but we are working with the governmental assignment. I already got some, maybe we can collaborate with some coming application. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, I think that we will leave the floor for the audience and the questions. We have some more minutes, so please.
Great, thank you. Duše Djakoju. Often many of the problems comes with the fact that the Romani a group is not one group, it's so divided, or it's more than one group. Just in Sweden we have mostly is of 5 bigger groups of Romani people, and often the problems comes when, even though they are very different internally, they are all categorized as Romani, but still, and then there's cultural clashes, and in the lack of knowledge of the cultural particularities within the most of the beggars on the Stockholm streets are newly coming from Balkans, and then the Romani with cleaning rituals, as they are called, sometimes are often associated with the Kelderrush, but they are not with the travelers at the same way. And could you give examples how these cultural clashes between Romani groups from Ukraine, perhaps, and the authorities trying to sometimes helping them integrate, and sometimes in the opposite, unfortunately, trying to expel them. But can you give some window into that?
Yeah, who wants to pick the question?
If I can start shortly.
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you for the question and the picture. In my point of view, I have also heard that, of course, that we, the Roma people, are from so many different groups in different countries and so on, and which have influenced also a lot about the differences. But I think, in my point of view, as I mentioned, that's a thing which the decision makers and other people who are not so well known with the Roma issues and the cultures or whatever, the situation, it's some kind of, for me, and question and answer at the same time, that it's so difficult to work with the Roma people, so maybe we not prioritize that this year so much. Or maybe for a project, but not in the long run. And it shouldn't be, because the Roma children are equally the non-Roma children. What is all those anti-discrimination laws? What is all the conventions from the United Nations and the European Council of Europe? What is the value of those if they are not also including the Roma children? If people and decision makers would thought a little bit, just a few inches from that perspective, we would have a different situation for the Roma people in whole Europe, also in Ukraine, also in in Asia, South America, and North America. And people know these things. They know, but some governments and leaders, they need those to blame on when things are getting wrong in their own countries. So they can stay behind and have someone to blame. Yeah, I will stop there.
Ні. Я би хотіла додати, так, я погоджуюсь з тим, що і самі роми досить погано знають загалом про інших ромів, мають багато навіть упереджень щодо один одного. І не роми, які приймають рішення, дуже часто також дуже мало знають або спираються на стереотипи.
I would like to add that even Romas themselves usually don't know that much about other Roma groups, and they even have prejudices regarding those groups. So it's not a surprise that when governments issue policies regarding the Romas, that they are issuing those policies on the basis of some of those prejudices as well.
Але без ромів зробити ці зміни неможливо, і я думаю, навіть неправильно було би.
But to make policy changes without Romas would have been wrong.
І те, що роми, незважаючи на різні думки, різні досвіди, все-таки знаходять майданчики, де об'єднуються і адвокатують ці питання, для мене це те цінне, про що потрібно розповідати іншим.
And for me, the fact that Romas from different backgrounds and groups sharing some of the platforms and finding common language, for me that's a positive sign that has to be stressed.
Такою рольовою моделлю можу назвати агенцію адвокації ромської культури «Арка», до якої входить і Януш Панченко. І на сайті можна подивитися рівень їхньої залученості в ці міжнародні адвокаційні процеси.
And a good example of such work is the Agency for the Advocacy of Roma Culture, represented in turn by Janush, Panchenko. So it's a good example of the advocacy on the international level.
Вони не просто є групою, яку треба підтримувати, яку дискримінують. Вони мають вплив, вони мають голос, вони стають активними дієвцями, зокрема і від імені України. Це теж дуже цінно.
So the Roma people are not just a group that experience oppression. They are also becoming subject on the international arena, also advocating the Ukrainian cause.
Yeah, Domino.
Just shortly, I want to add just shortly about that when you mentioned, Nataliia, about that Roma people are also discriminating each others. And of course, that's a human thing, normal thing when you're sitting on your side and you don't get so much access, you don't get the possibilities because of you're in the hands of the decision makers. You're looking at other Roma people, and of course you envy. You want that for your children too. And I don't think that I can see it also here in Sweden that in my group, of course, I'm proud of what I have learned from my parents and my grandfathers, and my language variety of the Romani Shib is the best in the world, of course. And every Roma is saying that. But every Ukrainian say also, if you come from different regions and counties, of course you are proud of what you have got with you from the childhood. That's not, because I am afraid that people who are on the other side, they're going to we'll let them fight until the end and then we can start to work. An explanation that we ain't never going to do that. So that's also a thing that I'm a little bit fearing about, that the non-Roma are using that as a tactic also, not to have to deal with.
Yeah, right. Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other questions?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we take the last one. Thank you.
We spoke a little bit about languages, but what about history? How deep we know history of Roms and how they know their history?
Well, the history since northwest India, the scholars are telling some different centuries, but on those centuries from 500-600 years after Christ, there is also 700-800-900 years from India that big groups have been traveling out, moved out from that country. And those are well known in the Indian history. They are archived because of the religions, because of the issue which are today's natural catastrophes and hunger need and so on. Those you can look back that yes, the Roma people are from that country from the beginning, and also in the varieties, the language, where you can go back, and the scholars linguists have made that already. And of course, in those countries where the Roma people were not allowed to go to the education field, they don't have so much knowledge still today about their own history. There is some sayings which different groups are taking with them and give that also to their children, the next generation. But more and more today, people are starting to know the history, that they are from the big country in mother country India. There is also some other beliefs coming, the Christianity. In the book of Moses, 5 books, there is also this that you're going to be a cursed group and so on, and you know those verses from the Holy Bible, but also the Torah, and the Jews are feeling that they are theirs, but there is some Roma groups that feel that it's their history also. So there is this, but there is scholars that says that yes, there is evidence from more than 1,000 years ago, and 1300s from the Isle Crete here in Greek. There is also evidence that the group are in Europe for the first time, and so on.
Is it something that you would like to add?
Я би хотіла сказати, що насправді за останні десятиріччя нарешті історія ромів, можна сказати, стала вписана в історію Європейського Союзу, яка твориться як інклюзивна. В багатьох країнах проводяться нарешті фундаментальні дослідження, оприлюднені масиви раніше невідомих архівних документів, з якими працюють вчені. Зібрано купу усних архівів, до яких насправді вже можуть звертатися не науковці, митці, наприклад. І це дуже важливо, тому що, наприклад, переклад.
In the last decades, the history of Romas was inscribed into the history of the European Unions, and many projects, many researchers are starting to, well, get to know more about the Roma identity. They're using the archives, they're using the oral traditions of information that are passed from generation to generation.
Наприклад, в другій половині 90-х років в Україні було записано 300 інтерв'ю фондом Шоа, свідчень про геноцид ромів.
At the end of 1990s in Ukraine, the fund Shoah sponsored the recording of more than 300 interviews with the Romas concerning the subject of the genocide.
Спочатку до них мали доступ тільки науковці, і вони зберігалися тільки у Вашингтоні і Варшаві.
At the beginning, only the scientists had access to those recordings, and they were stored in Warsaw and Washington.
Але більшість науковців не могли працювати з цими свідченнями.
The majority of the scientists could not study these testimonies.
Тому що там була мішанка мов, і дуже мало хто міг, в принципі, це зрозуміти.
Because of the mix of different languages used there, and not enough people who could actually understand those languages.
В 2015-16 році Український центр вивчення історії Холокосту здійснив транскрибацію частини інтерв'ю.
So in 2015-2016, the Ukrainian Center for the Study of Holocaust transcribed many of these interviews,
І оприлюднив їх на своєму сайті.
published it on their website.
Це простимулювало створення низки культурних проєктів і виставок.
And it encouraged the creation of different exhibitions and cultural projects.
Наприклад, ця сама агенція адвокації ромської культури «Арка» зробила виставку їхні спогади нашими очима.
For instance, the Center for the Advocacy of Roma Culture, Arka, created an exhibition called Their Experiences Through Our Eyes.
Коли молоді роми переосмислювали досвід через покоління своїх предків, які пережили геноцид.
Handling the young Romas as they were rethinking the experiences of their ancestors who went through the genocide.
І ця виставка подорожувала багатьма країнами Європи, зокрема Європейський Ромський інститут культури і мистецтв, і зараз в Бабиному Яру в заповіднику демонструється.
And this exhibition traveled through many countries in Europe, also the Center for the Study of Culture and the Heritage of Romas, and now in the Babi Yar in Kiev.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for your patience. We are been a little bit delayed, but it's always like that with interesting discussions, and then we have the translation. I want to thank you very much, but also before ending, so I just bought this bilingual children book. And the name of the writer is Oksana Tsigani. So I got very curious about that, and I just want to close with the question for you, Nataliia. How come?
Yeah. Цигани зараз вважаються етнонімом з негативним конотацією. Але в українській традиції за кілька століть виробилися різні ставлення до цієї групи і, відповідно, до представників цієї культури.
Today the ethnic term Tsigani has a negative connotation, but in Ukraine throughout the ages different views about this group were formed.
Відповідно, за ці сторіччя в Україні з'явилася велика кількість, понад 100 топонімів словом циган.
Yeah, and throughout the centuries, more than 400 toponyms with the name Tsigani were created.
Це було пов'язано, наприклад, з місцями традиційних зупинки таборів біля ярмарків.
It's linked, for example, with the traditional placements of the camps of Romas.
Також, коли записувалися в козаки, не мала значення національність. І серед українських козаків були роми або ті, які себе так називали, і їм давали прізвисько циган, яке стало прізвищем.
And in the Cossack conscription, it played no role which nationality you had. Therefore, many Romans were conscripted, and by doing so, they received the family name Tsiganov.
І у нас є такий сайт, де можна подивитись частотність прізвищ в Україні по різних роках, і ви побачите, що це прізвище є в різних регіонах України, фіксується.
And in Ukraine, you have a website where can you study the frequency of the usage of different family names in Ukraine, and you can also sort it according to the region.
І переважно її носії українці.
And usually the people who have those surnames are Ukrainians.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you so much for your talk. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.